Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up? Wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decorah. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city, Madison, Wisconsin. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Survive and Thrive 8791 podcast, or you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Decorah 8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at Tim Decorah. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or like button wherever you listen to the show. Also, leave me a comment if you're watching on any of those places. If you liked what you heard, if there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to share their story or tell their story, email me at tdecorah@gmail.com. Glad you could join us today. Our mission, my mission, is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will air on Monday and Thursday morning, featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects, such as, but not limited to, grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, divorce, success despite challenges, etc. Our guests will share how they learn to survive and thrive. Today I am solo, and I will get to that a little bit as to why I am solo, why you get me today. Today, I welcome myself to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Normally I'm welcoming somebody else, but it is myself today. I was born in Portage, Wisconsin, raised in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. I am a graduate of Wisconsin Dells High School, and I'm a proud chief. After high school, I would take my talents to the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, down in the southwest part of the state, of our great state of Wisconsin, where I would study physical education and health, and was a member of the Pioneer men's basketball team. After graduation, I was hired for my first job at Hillsborough High School, a small school 90 minutes north of Madison, Wisconsin. And truth be known, I am forever grateful for there's a number of people in that small town, but first of all, my first principal I ever worked for, very, very fine man who passed away a couple of years ago, Principal Wayne Stelkoff, was there in that first interview, along with our athletic director, Jim Moe. So forever thankful for those two gentlemen for taking a chance on me and hiring me for my first job as not only head basketball coach at Hillsborough, but also physical education teacher. I also want to thank two other gentlemen really, Dave Alexander. Dave was our head football coach at the time in Hillsborough. And initially I was hired to be the head football coach and head basketball coach, and there was no way I was going to be able to take on those two things. So they ended up hiring Dave, who had been a coach and teacher in Hillsborough prior to. They brought him to coach the football team. And after some long reluctance, I ended up being his assistant coach. To this day, going on 33 years later, him and I would say, are best friends, and I talk regularly to him, probably once or twice a month. And then another gentleman, a good friend, and he was a business owner, the eye doctor in town, Jeff Clark. He was our booster club, basketball club, kind of oversaw that. He was there to help promote basketball and such, and he's been a good friend to this day, as well as the players, the basketball players that I had a chance to coach, and the football players and the students, and certainly the fans and the community of Hillsborough. I loved my 3 years there. But after 3 years of leading the Tiger basketball team, and we were actually pretty good my third year when I left, I would be hired to coach basketball and teach at-risk students at Waunakee High School. Waunakee High School was, at the time, a medium-sized school about 20 minutes north of our great capital city, Wisconsin, and I would spend 29 years teaching and coaching for the Warriors. And ironically, I was there 29 years. And I would say that there was a good friend of mine in the coaching, very, very good friend of mine, high up the ladder in coaching, one of the most respected gentlemen, not only in the state, but probably the country, had mentioned when I said I think I'm going to apply for the basketball job at Wanakee. This gentleman said, "Don't do it. Don't go. Don't go." And I remember on the phone talking with him, and he said, I think the words "don't go" probably about a dozen times, but instead of listening to him, I ended up going and coached there for 8 years, and he probably said seven too many. But professionally, it was really good for me. Became a good to great physical education and health teacher. The basketball, I'll admit, did not go as well as I wanted it to go, but again, that's probably more to do with me than it was the players. We had some really, really good kids, and I loved my time being the coach, but that only lasted 8 years, but I would spend another 21 more there teaching and coaching various things: middle school basketball, freshman football, girls varsity basketball. So I've kind of done it all, and I loved my time in Wanakee, but now I've moved on. Obviously I'm doing the podcast now, and the podcast is more of I'm not going to say side hustle. Any of the hustles I've had on the side have usually resulted in a little bit of funding. But with this podcast, I'm doing it out of the kindness of my heart, and it's a lot of fun, and I'm learning a lot of things, and there's a lot of people that are coming on the show and telling their story, maybe for the first time or for the 50th time. I love sharing other people's stories, and so far the feedback to the podcast has been amazing. Just some of the analytics that I get from Spotify, where I upload my podcast to, they send me some analytics, and now the podcast is available, I think, in nine countries now. So there are people tuning in all over the world, but it's been hit in the Dane County area, and I would say much of Wisconsin, having had the high school probably career, maybe not the college basketball career that I wanted, but certainly the high school career that I had for athletics. Kind of made a name for myself. Some people remember me, and now that they know that I've been a teacher in the Madison area, gained a lot of a bit of a following with the podcast, all because I'm here to help others through some of the things that life throws at them, and that's really the reason for the podcast. Today you get me. Up to this point, I've had guests lined up for episodes, and for whatever reason, well, the first time I didn't have anybody lined up was during the holiday season, so there was back-to-back episodes, I believe 21 and 22, or 22 and 23, somewhere in there, that I did not have a guest for that particular week of, I think it was around the holiday season. So I filled in, and this week, and I am recording this on Sunday, March 9th, I had 3 people that were kind of ready to share their story, but because of circumstances are not able to be on the show today. So you get me. So I'm going to go through and tell a little bit about my story. This will probably be a little shorter episode than normal, but I'm going to give you, I think, some really, really good things that you can apply to your own situation, and maybe give you a little guidance, because prior to December of 2021, I didn't really have anything to go by. I was just kind of really not happily moving through life. Things got a little mentally and physically tough that year, 2021, and I needed to get some help. But again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. This week I've been busy with work and had to have rescheduled some of my guests. And when that happens, you get me. So again, I'm recording on Sunday, March 9th. It's the beginning of March Madness, and there's a reason for the word madness. Yesterday, on March 8th, I had 3 out of my 4 favorite area teams lose. Unfortunately, 2 of those teams are done for the season. The reason that March Madness is one of my favorite parts of the year is because the weather starts warming up. Spring is near, and there are so many basketball games being played. Boys, high school girls. We've got men's and women's college. But before we get to part of my story, or kind of some of my story, I need to talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants. Great place that people can escape to. And for me, it's a great escape from cooking dinner. Typically, I am the cook in the house. With that great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere, people keep coming back to Buck and Honey's. With locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb, most communities in the Dane County area, and that is the county that encompasses a large part of, obviously, our capital city, Madison, Wisconsin, but some of the suburbs. Most communities in the Dane County area can get to a Buck and Honey's within 10 to 15 minutes. And yes, I always ask the guests, have you been to Buck and Honey's? And yes, I have been to all of the locations. My favorite probably being not only Wanakee, but also Monona, because it's close to our condominium here on the east side. But on the podcast, typically our guests will follow the format for sharing their story like this. In segment 1, I usually the guests and I talk about what was it like. So that would be where they grew up, where they went to high school, if they went to college, or if they went into the workforce. We talk about that. And then typically what brings them onto the show is anybody that wants to come on the show, they have to have some qualifiers, and really that is something that they went through and survived and then now are thriving. And the surviving part could be anything from, and I mentioned it earlier, divorce, professional setback. It could be an injury. It could be an accident of some kind, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, any of those things. And then they came out because of 5 suggestions that each guest bring on. They come on and teach our listeners and teach myself 5 different suggestions of how they learn to thrive. And for me, I found out after talking to many of the guests that thriving is abstract. It might mean to me something different, completely different than what it means to the guest. I have found out if you can return back to your kind of as close to a normal way of living that you did before whatever it is that brought you on the show, whatever you survived, if you can return back to somewhat of a normal life and thrive either in the workplace, if you're a coach, if you are a student, whatever it happens to be, if you can thrive and do well after that, that would be the qualifiers. So if you, again, have a story to share, email me, tdecorah@gmail.com, and we will get you on the show, because everybody has a gift, and it's up to you what you want to do with that gift. You can keep it for yourself, and that's entirely up to you, and I respect that. But at the same time, if you have survived something, share that gift. I think that the best part of sharing that gift is it helps your recovery from whatever you survived, and it also helps other people, and it gives them hope and inspires them, all that good stuff, and that's why I'm here. So today I want to talk about how things have gotten better for me, and it all happened kind of a little bit by luck. But the story for me always starts on December 2021. 2 really, really good friends came to my house because they were concerned. And at that particular time, and some of you that have heard my story, or those of you that haven't, I'm going to tell it just a little bit, that there was a knock on the door. And at the time I was sitting in my recliner and wondering, face in my hands, trying to figure out why this was happening to me. And at the time I was experiencing some severe anxiety bordering on panic. And that knock on the door disturbed some of that panic and anxiety that I was going to. And I got up and I walked over to the living room window, and I looked out, and I thought I would see either the UPS man there or an Amazon man or the mailman. Instead, I see 2 of my coworkers there. And the first thing I thought of was, oh no, why are they here? And I quietly tiptoed back to the chair. And for the first time in a couple of days, maybe a week or so, my prayers came true. I prayed that. I said, please make them go away. Please make them go away. Fingers interlocked in that prayer position, head down. Please make them go away. Please make them go away. And it was probably a minute or so. I heard car doors open and slam shut, and I heard two vehicles start up, and both vehicles left. And I'm not sure exactly what I call it, a spiritual experience. And for me, God is my higher power. And on that particular day, God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I picked up my cell phone, looked at my most recent calls, and one of them was a coworker trying to call and wonder where I'm at, how I'm doing, checking in. And I called and I said, hello, I'm here. And I uttered those three words, and those of you that have heard me talk before, three words that have essentially saved my life. Kept me from probably not being here in 2025. I said, I need help. I need help. Three words that saved my life. I don't remember if it was 5 or 10 minutes later. They're there knocking on the door. I let them in. We hug it out. There's tears that are shed, probably more so mine than theirs, but tears shed. And I walk in and we sit down, and I said I needed help, and they agreed, and they had some phone numbers for me to call and contact, and I got myself some help on that particular day. And I'm glad that day came, and I'm glad they came to my house. And I don't know what would have happened if they didn't come on that particular day or care. They did, and I got the help that I need. I'm going to give you some of the reasons for my mental and physical being the best it's been since probably my late 20s, early 30s. Into my 20s, my wife and I were very fortunate to have our 3 kids when we were relatively young. Done having kids when I was 29 years old and up and moving around and busy with them. But early 30s was about the time where my body started to slow down a little bit, started going into a little bit of a decline. This is where I would like you to pull out the notebooks, pens, and pencils. Normally we save this for the end of the episode, but we're going to go a little early on in the episode here. So these are the 5 things that happened to me that allowed me to change the course of my life from that December 2021 day to March 9th, that we're recording this March 9th, 2025. And these are the things that I did. And these are just merely suggestions. These are things that worked for me. I'm not a person that gives advice anymore, although if somebody asked me for some advice, I might share some, but I only share advice that worked for me. So somebody comes in and says, hey, Tim, Coach Decorah, Mr. Decorah, I need some advice. Can you help me with this? And whatever they present to me, I typically will think for a second, and how did that same situation occur in my life? I can only speak from my own experiences, and that's how I work my advice. So if you want advice, I'm going to give you it based upon my own experiences. But the first thing I did, December 2021, I quit drinking alcohol, and I also stopped using anxiety medication on that particular day. And what that allowed me to do was to start to think with a little bit of a clearer head, because I thought that was part of the problem. One of the coping skills that I used was I used alcohol, and for me it had worked probably since I started using alcohol. In my late 20s, early 30s, I was prescribed some medication for my anxiety and had taken that for roughly 21, almost 22 years. And again, used it probably more in a prescribed way, but there were times where I would take more than the prescribed dose to try to help fight off these feelings of anxiety and panic. And those of you that are listening that have had anxiety and or a panic attack know what I'm talking about, is they are not fun. Anxiety is not fun, and certainly panic attacks are not fun. For me, one of my panic attacks landed me in the hospital in an emergency room. That's how serious, at least for me, panic attacks were, and that's how serious I took those feelings and symptoms where I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I thought I was going to die during my panic attack. But I gave up those 2 items and I started thinking a little bit clearly, and that was my beginning of my road to recovery. There's an author friend of mine, and I've not met him face to face. I have only met him via Zoom calls, and he was also a podcast guest back in, I want to say, end of November, December somewhere. The author's name is Todd Kinney, and he's actually going to be in the Dane County area in Middleton and actually Wanakee, speaking at the public library in Wanakee. And he wrote a book, and the book was titled I Didn't Believe It Either, and it's one dad's discovery that everything is better without alcohol. And he really kind of summed up what I try to sell to other people, that life is so much better without alcohol. And that was kind of the gist of his book, and he's going to be in Wanakee to talk about that. But really for me, quitting alcohol and the anxiety medication, which actually was creating more anxiety for me, I stopped using those, and essentially I've been anxiety and alcohol free for, I believe it's 1,178 days as of today. So that was one of the things I did. Number 2, I started getting honest. I spent a lot of time early in my life ashamed of my home life. And I was probably measuring myself according to friends in school and the kind of lives that they were living. And that I didn't want to admit that I maybe had an alcohol problem. And I certainly didn't want to admit that I might have had a mental health disorder. And for me, that mental health disorder was an anxiety disorder. Those are things, at least in my mind, that I thought were things that I thought were weaknesses. I probably showed some courage and strength, and maybe the toughest thing to do in anybody's life, at least in mine, because it took me a long, long time, was to start to admit to some of those things, that I might have had some issues with alcohol, issues with shame, issues admitting that maybe this anxiety was more than just the normal anxiety, that it was causing me to miss work, miss school, miss obligations, sometimes being absent as a father, as a friend. And anytime anything can prevent you from doing those things, doesn't matter what it is. Could be gambling, could be an eating disorder, could be a little bit of depression, anxiety. If it's causing you to miss out on the daily activities of your life, that's when you might need to take a look at why you're missing out on those things. And I had to do that. And I had to do that by starting to get honest and ask for some help. So that leads me to number 3. I got some professional help. I talked to a counselor. So on that December 2021 day where my 2 coworkers showed up, they had phone numbers. They did some research and had some numbers for me to call and get some professional help. So I talked to a counselor and a psychiatrist. And what ended up happening was I thought I needed to get some help for this anxiety medication and an alcohol disorder. And what came out of it, in addition to maybe those 2 things, was a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, that I always kind of knew I had an anxiety issue. I just didn't know how bad it was. And after talking to a psychiatrist and a counselor, I started answering those questions that, if those of you that are familiar with getting therapy or going to a counselor or going to a psychiatrist, they ask anywhere between, 80 and 100 questions. And I can't remember what some of those questions are, but basically they're trying to get a feel for what's going on with your life. And basically those are called intake questions. And then they can make an assessment, or possibly, in my case, they made a diagnosis that I had a generalized anxiety disorder, something that lasts not only just days, weeks, months, and in my case, years. So I got that professional help, and really the big thing I think I needed was, why is this happening? And then once it was named, then I could start to work on that and do some research on my own. Number 4, I started to put myself first. My mental health comes first. My sobriety comes first. All of those things come first. My physical health comes first, because if I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of anyone else. And for a lot of years, those people that I was helping, working with, I don't know what the percentage is, but maybe I was 50 to 75% of what I am now to this day. I think I'm operating at pretty darn close to 100% efficiency, because I don't have all of those things like issues with alcohol, issues with anxiety medications, certainly issues with anxiety or depression or trauma. I have very little of those things, so that when people ask me for help, they ask me to come and speak to their particular group, speak at a conference, certainly doing this podcast, I can do it now almost at 100% efficiency. Back when I was wrestling with those things, who knows, like I said, I was probably operating at 50 to maybe 75%. And after getting some professional help and certainly starting to put me first, I have lived a way better life than I did before. And last item, number 5, is I've been sharing my story. So in December 2021, I got that help, and I spent the next 9-10 months working on me and going to a counselor and talking and essentially sharing my story and talking about the things that cause me anxiety and maybe some depression and some grief and some trauma. And it was at one point somebody asked that maybe knew me prior to December 2021, and then certainly after, could either see, hear, feel a change in me. And I had a person that said, hey, would you mind coming and talking to our particular group on a Monday night? It was at a church in Madison, Wisconsin. And I said, sure. There was 2 speakers. There was a short speaker, I think it's 15 minutes. And then there was a long speaker who I believe spoke either for 30 to 45 minutes. So I was the short speaker. And I got up and told my story and shared some of the coping strategies that I'm going to 50 to 60 people in attendance physically there. And then there was another, I believe, 80 to 90 people listening, tuning in via like a Zoom call. And I got up there and was trembling like a leaf, had some anxiety because I'm standing in front of complete stranger. And I mean, for my job as a teacher, I could stand and talk to high school students for hours on end. But here I was talking to adults, various ages, and I told my story and the coping skills that I use to keep me mentally, physically, emotionally well. To be quite honest, I thought I did a terrible job. I didn't think I did very good. And they gave me a nice little round of applause, and I went and sat down, and I'm thinking to myself, that did not go well at all. The 30-minute speaker got up there, and when the 30-minute speaker was done, the host who was hosting the meeting said, okay, we're going to have the 2 speakers. We're going to have Tim and the other speaker come up and please come up and, shake hands, thank them, talk to them, exchange information, whatever. And what was amazing about that whole experience was I thought I did terrible. I didn't think I did a very good job. That's not the feedback I got. These people started lining up and coming up and shaking my hand, and several of them said, that was amazing. Have you done that before? Or we need to have you come and speak to our group. That story was inspiring. Those skills that you shared, that presentation was outstanding. And what I thought was terrible ended up turning out to be pretty good. And that was in November of 2022. Somebody said there's libraries in the Dane County area in your hometown that have speaking opportunities. They're always looking for speakers and keynote speakers, guest speakers, whatever you want to call it. Send out an email to your local libraries and see if anybody is interested. So I crafted up a nice little letter, told my story, asked if they were looking for guest speakers, and lo and behold, my inbox started filling up in my email with some requests and trying to line things up. And the best part of that whole situation was at the very end, first of all, they'd give me the date, the time, when can I be available, and the last part of those emails always ended with, and what is your fee? So I had to talk to a couple of keynote speaker friends of mine about what I should charge some of these libraries. And back then I wasn't charging very much at all. And so I came very cheap. So I think maybe that's why a lot of these libraries and different places started calling me is they were getting a really, really good speaker. And hey, that's not me. Well, that's kind of me telling you, but it's also feedback that I've received on my keynote presentations that they were getting a presenter, a keynote speaker for very cheap. So I since then have raised my prices a little bit, but at that particular time, I needed reps to tell my story, share it in a concise manner, a format that is understandable and gets people to pick up their phone, call a doctor, call a therapist, and or utter those three words, I need help. And that's been the cool thing about that. So those are the 5 things that have really, really helped me to navigate physical, emotional, spiritual, mental help. And it's been a great 1,178 days. So again, December 2021, I would have that spiritual experience that would change my life. In segment 2, I'll share a little bit of the story and how I became a keynote speaker and able to retire after a 32-year teaching career and start this wildly popular podcast. So I want you to please stay tuned. Don't change that channel. You're not going to want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We will be back.
If you, a loved one, or someone you know is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help and resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available 24/7, 365 and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Emergency Crisis Services, dial 911. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, dial 988. To connect via web, chat, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to say 3 words. I need help. Now, back to the show.
We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim Decorah. The podcast is where I feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. I am as upbeat and as positive as I have ever been, and that has allowed me to survive and thrive despite some mental and physical challenges that had a life-threatening hold on me. Today, because of the amazing support from family, my wife and 3 kids and grandkids now, friends, communities, and this podcast, I'm living a darn good life. In December of 2021, I had 2 coworkers come to my house and help me get the help I needed. And that started the road to mental and physical recovery. And I'm glad that happened. What a great episode. I'm so glad you could join. Today, I just shared my story and it's what it's like to live a whole different way of life. I went through a tough time in my life and had to make some changes or I wouldn't be here today. Here's what I shared with you earlier, my 5 suggestions that helped me through a stressful time in my life. Number 1, I quit drinking alcohol and using anxiety medication. Number 2, I started to get honest about my life. Number 3, I got professional help, talked to a counselor or psychiatrist, and I got a diagnosis. Number 4, I started putting myself first. And in order to help others, it's important to help yourself first. Otherwise, you can't help anybody. And number 5, I started sharing my story. So as I close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, some final thoughts as I move forward in this podcast. I will have, and then in the coming weeks, I plan to have a good friend of mine had an accident that caused him to be a quadriplegic. He'll come on to talk about he'll share his story and what happened and how he's managing life now. I will have a basketball coach from the Dane County area. We'll also talk about how he navigated COVID during that 2020-21 year, how he navigated COVID and what caused him his anxiety and a little battle that he had. So he'll come on. I also have a stroke victim, actually 2 stroke victims that I hope to have. The first one is a gal from just outside the Dane County area that suffered a stroke. She'll tell her story. And then a friend of mine that tip-top shape. I believe he's in his 70s now, but did a lot of running, and he also had a stroke. About the last person you would think who would have a stroke would be somebody who exercises a lot, but he had a stroke, and he's going to talk to us and share his story about how he has navigated that and is back on the running road to recovery. He is back running with just some minor issues with the stroke, but it hasn't prevented him from back to what he loves doing. And I'll have many, many more guests here. So if you are a person who wants to share your story and you got a story that you think could help others, reach out to me. I would love to have you on my show. And if you know a person who would love to share their story, drop their name in an email as well. On our next episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they learn to survive and thrive. If you have a story to share or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecorah@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive as well. Until next time, take care.